Today we're in Altamont Springs to speak with Keith Ledford. Hi, Keith.
Hello.
How did you first become involved in music?
Well, how far do we want to go back? In the womb, probably. Both of my grandfathers were Pentecostal ministers, and my parents sang in the choir, and we were at church every time the door was open, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, revivals all the time. And so we had music. Half of the service was involved in music. So we had music at the house. Dad played piano, loved to dance. As I said, they sang in the choir. So that's where I really got started, I suppose, even before school started. In the 8th grade, my parents decided, they owned a dry cleaning plant in Cleveland, Tennessee. We come to Florida every year for vacation. So they decided, let's just move to Florida. So before my 8th grade year, during that summer, we moved to Clearwater. And the significant thing there for me is that's where I started in band. We were only there 4 months because Dad and I were so homesick we moved back to Tennessee. But I started out on a school horn, a mellophone, which looked like a French horn. I wanted a trumpet, but they didn't have one. Piston valves, played with the right hand like a trumpet. So we moved back to Cleveland, and I got started in band in the 8th grade with the high school director, Mr. Krill Higgins. And he was my inspiration for wanting to become a band director. He did the high school chorus, band. Some people didn't want him to, but we were not integrated. He went over to the black school and started a band on his own. And he also was the choir director at Broad Street Methodist Church. We did musicals, so I got to play in the pit orchestra and marching band and concert and all that. And so my junior year in high school, the Russians put up Sputnik, 1957. Mm-hmm. So all my friends were going to go to Georgia Tech and be engineers and be rich and famous. And I thought, sounds good to me. So several things happened, actually in 1 week. We had a revival at my church, and I realized that I didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I had a religion, but not a relationship. And so I became a Christ follower. And then I started thinking seriously about my life, what I wanted to do. So I go see the guidance counselor at the high school. Told her I wanted to go to college and major in music. She started laughing. She said, Ledford, you're not college material. We're just trying to get you out of high school. And I knew what she meant, but I said, what do you mean? She said, well, for example, you took Algebra 1 in the 10th grade. You took no algebra this last year. You want to go to college? You got to take Algebra 2 in the 12th grade, having not had it for a year. I said, okay. She said, I'm not finished. You also have to take geometry simultaneously. I said, okay. She said, I'm not finished. She told me exactly what grades I had to make to graduate. So I did, and tried out for Jay Julian, who was the band director at Tennessee Tech then. So I went over there for 2 years, and then transferred to Florida State. I wanted to teach in Florida, and that's how I got to Florida. Well, I was there 1960 to 1962 when I graduated, and interestingly enough, the person who had the most influence on me was not a Florida State teacher. I got married my junior year, and things happened to me in my junior year. My love of my life, married for 53 years now. But I went to intern with Jeff Bradford. They let me intern in town because I was married at Augusta Rod Junior High. And I walked in, and I was probably the 40th or 50th intern he had. I mean, he's a marvelous teacher of teachers. First thing he said, hi, I'm Jeff. He stuck out his hand. He said, you belong to FBA? I said, what's that? He said, Florida Bandmasters Association. You can't teach for me unless you belong. Here's an application. Give me $5 and you can teach for me. Well, I want to teach, so I gave him the $5 and I interned with him. It was a wonderful experience. I remember we were at the district contest, it was called then, and the Leon High School band with Oliver Hobbs came on the stage. And it was really interesting. Seniors came on first, and then the juniors. In the middle of the sophomore class, his first lieutenant said, stop, stage is full, maybe next year. Well, I got to meet Oliver. He did a lot of sight reading judging around the state. And sight reading was always a problem for me because of my vision problem. And he said, well, in that Kansas drawl, we never worried a whole lot about sight reading. We had so many youngsters, we figured somebody's bound to get it. So I'm trying to think about now getting a job because I'm graduating this semester. And I would not recommend to anybody what I did. I sat down with no computer, an old-fashioned typewriter, and wrote 67 letters, one to each county in the state of Florida. Do you have a band opening? Well, then I start getting these applications back, and I'm like, oh, man, and that's not a way to get a job. You got to know somebody. So at that festival, Hank McCord, who owned Capitol Music, came around and said, you got a job yet? And I said, no. He said, Bristol's open. I said, Tennessee, Virginia? He said, Florida. I said, where's that? He said, well, it's over about 50 miles on the way to Panama City. So I went over there and interviewed and got the job. And I learned a whole lot that year. I had some friends who helped me. Lewis Jones was at Greensboro. Ken Potter was at Carabel. Jerome Edwards was at Sneed's. And I made a lot of mistakes, but I was the only music teacher in the whole county. Liberty County is the smallest county in the state of Florida. And I was the 19th band director in 19 years. I lasted 1 year. And there's a real story behind that. But anyway, we went to Panama City to Everett Junior High, large junior high, mostly military brats, 1,300 students. And things were going well. I was there 2 years, and the principal moved down the street to Rutherford High and took me with him. He asked me if I'd go to the high school. The high school director was going to the community college, and I said, okay. So we had some really good successes. Several of the students I had at Rutherford became band directors, and that seemed like one of the things that regardless of how much I say, don't go into music, don't be a teacher, they did it anyway, which I was happy about, of course. But the second year I was there, the principal moved. He got elected superintendent. The assistant principal had been a good assistant, became the principal. And he called me in. He said, now, Mr. Ledford, you're teaching world geography and PE and all the band classes, marching band, jazz, music theory, and all that. He said, now, next year, you'll either have a math or a science class. I said, no, sir, I will not do that. That's not fair to the kids. So we hosted the North State Festival that year. J. Lewis Schlegel was over at Bay High, and I was at Rutherford. And the North Festival was in Panama City. Well, I met Ken Potter, who I had met at Tennessee Tech. And knowing him, of course, at Carabel. He said, Al Wood's leaving Oak Ridge in Orlando. I said, really? Where's he going? He said, he's going back to get his doctorate. And I said, oh, because I had known Al at Tennessee Tech also. So I came down, interviewed for the job. Ken was at Walker Junior High. I was only 7 and 8, adding a grade a year. And I heard them play their spring concert, and I'm like, whoa, all those kids are coming to Oak Ridge? He said, every one of them. I said, that's amazing. Well, Al was a fine Christian gentleman, a good teacher. The kids loved him, and they knew he was leaving. So he introduced me. He said, he might be your new band director next year. And he said, the next thing he said really did help because they all respected him. He said, if I ever hear that one of you said next year, but Mr. Wood did it this way, or last year, he said, I'll never speak to you again. And he turned and walked out. Oh. Well, that first year I was there, it was a statewide teacher walkout. There was a lot of stuff going on. Oak Ridge had 120 teachers. 80 of them plus the principals walked out at one time. And I didn't because I was in the hospital having my throat cut, my tonsils out because my insurance would pay. But anyway, we had a great time there. And that first year, some kid would say, but Mr., and he tapped his mouth, we'd all have a good laugh. So that really did help. And we had some successes in those 9 years at Oak Ridge. And first time I'd ever made a straight one at state, and got to know how that feels. And I was very timid. I didn't think I was as good a teacher as Mark Casey and Jack Williams because they changed music between district and state. So one day I got really bright one year, really, I got to do it, brave. We changed the march. We made a one. And all of a sudden it dawned on my pea brain, kids are human beings. If you give them a challenge by doing separate music, different music, they'll rise to the occasion. They can be bored playing 3 tunes for, 3 months. So that really did help. I left there and went to Valencia Community College to start a band program. That seems to be my lot in life. Was there 7 years, went to Winter Park Junior and then Maitland Junior, which became Maitland Middle School. And in '92 retired after 30 years. Now, what am I going to do now? The next day, I went to Lake Highland Prep to start a band program. No students, no music stands, no room, nothing. In 5 years, we had 85 kids playing and some really, really good stuff going on. Some fantastic private teachers, Katie Nicklin, Gordon O'Hara, and some of those people. And at that point, I went back into the public system at Jackson Middle School. And Jackson had been there 40 years. To my knowledge, they never made a superior. The first year, we went for comment only. It was a disaster. Sight reading, I remember waving my arms. Everybody was lost except one flute player. And I just kept on going because we're going for comment only. It didn't matter. The second year, I said, we need to get to work now because we're going to go for a rating. And Amy raised her hand. She said, if we make straight superiors, will you give us a pizza party? I thought, I can do that. And then the girl next to her raised her hand. They didn't usually raise their hand. And I said, yes. And she said, Rachel, she said, if we make all superiors in concert and sight reading, will you tell us how old you are? We had a big laugh, and I said, yeah. So I worked their little pants off that second year. Mike Parks came in from the county and helped me. Went to Bob Conger's school. Dr. Conger was doing this rank system. And so I decided to do that at Jackson. It was a wonderful system. And so we came out at sight reading, and I went on to, these are middle school kids. I put on my sad face, and I said, well, I'm 57, the pizza party is Wednesday afternoon. And they're looking at my face, and they're like, oh, no. And then when I said, wait a minute, did you hear what he said? I learned some things. My daughter told me, she was a science resource teacher for Seminole County. When I went to Jackson, from the upper crust to the inner city, she said, Dad, this may not be about you. You've had your superiors at state, your standing ovations, your triticos, music for Prague, and all that. She said, this may be about kids. Boy, was she right. I'm in a practice room one morning, and little girl Chelsea is playing her trumpet. And all of a sudden, she busted out crying. And I'm, Chelsea, honey, what's the matter? And she couldn't talk. I said, it's your mother, isn't it? She said, yes, sir. Her mother had died the month before that with AIDS. And she's now living with grandmother and a little brother. And it must have been her mother's birthday or something. And I'm like, oh, Lord. So I said, Chelsea, would it be okay if I prayed for you? She said, yeah. And so I did. And she thanked me and she left. She came back to class her normal bubbly self, 7th grader. And I thought, good Lord, when I started teaching, I never had dreamed that kids would have the problems they have today. But I learned something at Jackson. Kids are also the same. The kids at Lake Highland, the privileged, overprivileged in some cases, those at Jackson, inner city, we had 1,000 Hispanic children, 300 African Americans. But if they know the teacher knows what they're doing, and you don't play favorites, you don't bend the rules, and you love them, they'll kill for you. So we had a wonderful, wonderful deal at Jackson. My dad had Alzheimer's, and I was going to help Mom with him in Tennessee. And so I just resigned at Jackson because I was gone too much. And then they called me and said, at Maitland, they said, you've been here before. I said, yeah, you can't go back. They said, but this girl's going out on maternity leave. I said, Frankenstein? They said, yeah. I said, again? They said, yeah. I said, okay. And Eric Mendez was the band director. He'd been the assistant. Would you come and be Eric's assistant? I said, I'd be overjoyed to. He's a wonderful Christian gentleman, marvelous teacher, and that was the best way to end a career, those last 4 years. And wonderful parents, great kids. I mean, everything's going there, you know. So it's just a matter of, you know, waving your arms and having fun. Well, at a point, somebody said, you do realize you just earned a second retirement. And I said, say what? Because you have to be, 10 years. They said, no, now it's 6. I said, I didn't know that. So I earned a second retirement. All right, now what am I going to do? You finished 41 years, and you're going to sit around and watch TV and mow the grass. That's exciting. So Wycliffe Bible translators came to town from California about that time. So what I've been doing the last 10 years is going down there teaching children music. I have instruments from all over the world, and field trips come through. 3 times my wife and I have gotten to go overseas to Papua New Guinea to teach music to missionaries' kids. And so, that's what keeps my juices flowing, is doing those instruments with those kids.
Wow. Wow, and it all started on a mellophone.
Yeah, how about that?
Well, what sort of major challenges have you had as you've changed jobs or as you've changed communities?
Well, I spent 41 years in only 3 counties, but I was in a whole bunch of different schools, unlike some other people. And my biggest challenge is my vision, or lack of same. It's called ocular albinism. Only about 300,000 people in the country have it. It's hereditary. I have 2 grandsons with it. And glasses do not correct to 20/20. And so my big problem, of course, was sight reading. And because I hadn't seen the music, and the kids hadn't seen it, and kids were wonderful. Whether it's middle school or high school, they understand. In fact, we had a routine we'd go through with sight reading, and we'd clap the rhythm, and finger the notes. After I met Ken Williams at Winter Park, they sizzled the notes while they finger it. And I was like, yeah, why didn't I think of that? So we did it. You copy what you think is good. But I would always leave time at the end for the kids to tell me something I had missed. And inevitably, what about that railroad track that says Euro? Oh, what about that first inning with no repeats? Oh, thank you, So we got through it at district and state with the Lord's help. But of all the things kids have given me over the years, band banquets, Christmas gifts, whatnot, the thing I prize the most is a little plaque that Brian Chin and some of the guys at Oak Ridge gave me. It says, OR Band, where the blind lead the deaf.
What a great story about relationships. Well, what about some pivotal moments or pivotal people? You mentioned several names along the way, and you said you had some friends. They're pretty powerful friends.
Right. That's true. That's true. Pivotal moments when I married Mary, and I was at FSU, moving to Orlando, interestingly enough, going to Jackson, when I found out some things I didn't know about kids and about families. My parents obviously influenced me. They got married. Mom was a teenager, and they were married 65 years till Dad passed away. She's still living. She's 92. Still sings. I'll go sing hymns with her. And Miss Annette Hilliard was my first grade teacher. She had a real influence. 2 teachers influenced me more than any other. My high school band director, Mr. Higgins. But when Mom marched me across the street, and I'm 5 years old, to first grade, there was no kindergarten. And the principal saw my Coke bottle glasses and said, he can't come in here. Send her to Nashville, School for the Blind. And my mom was not going to send me 2 hours away, a 5-year-old with nobody there. So she goes over his head. She goes to Miss Annette, the first grade teacher. Miss Annette said to the principal, let me work with him and we'll see. Well, my desk touched the board, and you know how big first grade teachers write. Mm-hmm. Well, she helped me through first grade. And I made it through 8th grade and college and all that stuff. So at a point I thought, I need to write her a letter and thank her. She changed my life. And she told the principal, she said, if he goes over there and then decides to come back into a public setting, it could be really tough. So one day, I said, all right, today's the day. I'm going to write Miss Annette. I did. I wrote her a letter. She wrote me back, and she said, not many first graders ever contact me. You made my day. I found out some months later she died 2 weeks after that. So a word to the wise, if you think you need to do something, don't put it off. Do it. It might be too late. Okay?
Wow.
Some other people that had influence on me, of course, is Mr. Higgins, my high school director, Jeff Bradford. My idol was Gail Sperry at the University of South Florida, and then at UCF. I got to know him when we did a State Department study, differentiated staffing. And Del Kiefner was the music supervisor at that point, he and Alice Faig. And they broke the whole county up into units, music units. You had the high school teachers, middle school or junior high, and elementary teachers, and they all formed a unit. They got together and talked about curriculum and sequence and whatnot. From that, Ken Potter and I, who was at Walker, some days we'd swap jobs for a day. And he got to rehearse the more difficult music, kids that he had known. Some of them came from Bill Veeman, and Bill was a wonderful teacher too. So most of my kids came from Walker, some from Conway, some from Bill. But I would get down to the kids that just started, the 7th and 8th graders. They got to know me, and as a result of that, we had the smallest dropout rate between those 2 schools in the county. So it worked. Other people that helped me, well, I mentioned Del Kiefner, had a wonderful marching band at Edgewater. And he did this thing with a moving diamond and became a parallelogram. I could not figure out how to do it. So one day I swallowed my pride, drove up there and sat in his office. I said, all right, how do you do it? He said, hey, do what? I said, that diamond, it becomes a parallelogram. He said, you're going to be embarrassed when you find out how easy it is. I said, well, I may be, but I'm here. And sure enough, it was easy, but that's how you learn. You ask questions of your colleagues, okay? I was very fortunate to have some fantastic colleagues. Mark Casey at Boone, Jim Wilson at Jones. My daughters thought he was their second father. We had a really close relationship, still do. And Jack Williams at Winter Park. Last time I judged with Jack, we were down in Manatee County, and he said, it was at the lunch break, he said, now this next band, don't rate them down on interpretation. I thought, that's a strange comment. He's a judge, I'm a judge, but he's older and he's the head judge. Okay. I pulled the music out of the folder and I started laughing. I looked at Jack and I said, thank you. It would be very uncool to tell the band director who had composed 2 of the songs, Bob Sheldon, that you don't know how to interpret your own music. Joe Krynas was a real influence. He used to come by, as he did with most of the bands, and rehearse. And he'd stay at our house about once a week. But some things that nobody really knew, he invited Jay Friedman down, trombone player, who'd been in Orlando with Chicago Symphony one year, and during a Christmas break, and we got the band together, and they played with Jay as a soloist. And Jim Croft was sitting there, and Jay apologized. He'd had the flu and wasn't playing well, and Croft said, even his mistakes are musical. And I'm like, mistakes? I haven't heard any mistakes. Best principal I ever had was Mr. Keith Stone at Oak Ridge. He was at every concert. He was fair. He was a Christian gentleman, and just super. Got to meet some really well-known and fine musicians who became friends. Clifton Williams was one. He came up from Miami and rehearsed my band and then performed at Eola Park in the concert in the park. One of the things I learned was he was doing symphonians and he's rehearsing the band. And on the end of it, there's a timpani part that's bum, 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 rest, bum, rest, bum, bum, roll. And he told the kid, he said, take out those rests, just play right on through. He said, that's not the way I wrote it. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. Another one was Václav Nahibel. Well, everybody calls him Nelly Bell. He pronounced it Nahibel. He's from Czechoslovakia. I got to meet him and ask him about some of the markings he did on Tritico. Was I doing it right? And because he just made up some markings there, and I'm like, yeah. He said, you're doing it right. I got a note in the mail one time. It looked like a child's handwriting, very, irregular and whatnot. It was from Corel Husa. He was in the air, and he said, pardon my handwriting, it's very turbulent weather. But I was doing a clinic down in Texas, and one of your former students was there, and she said in high school that she played music for Prague and Apotheosis of This Earth. And he said, I just want to thank you for playing my music. And a couple of years ago in Oviedo, I got to actually meet him. That's just things that just don't happen. And the other one is Arnold Gabriel. He was here with the Air Force Band downtown Orlando, and I met him. And I had a student trying to get in the band, but he couldn't because he was an officer in the Air Force. But I said, I don't know what your schedule is, but we're doing an all-county band. I'm at Valencia Community College here. Love to have you come do it. Well, he'd done, all state, all universe, whatever. And he was my idol as far as conductors were concerned. He still is. So he said, write me a letter, and I'll see. Well, I'm teaching band at Valencia, and the secretary walks in and said, Mr. Ledford, you have a call from Bowling Air Force Base. And I'm like, the president wants to talk to me? What does he need to know? And it was Colonel Gabriel. He said, I've had a cancellation. I will be able to come and do your all-county. And we had it at Valencia. My daughter, Beth, got to play in the band, flute player. It was a wonderful experience. So I've had some great people that I've got to meet and know and be friends with. And that's how you learn. You talk to people, you listen. And I didn't listen as much as I should as a younger director, but, live and learn.
It sounds like that $5 to join FBA was certainly well spent.
Oh my goodness, that's for sure.
Well, now it's time to address some younger directors,
Okay.
Some folks who are just getting started. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I was going to say, make sure that you have characteristic tone quality. And I've listened to all the other people, and that's basically what they say, and that's because it's true. And that rank system we did at Jackson, when kids started out, they had 10 things it's a pass-off, like a rubric. And first thing you have to do is take the instrument out and put it together. Well, that's a point. With clarinets, that's very important because that middle key. And then they have to develop a characteristic tone quality as defined by the director. And kids they could call in on the phone there. Hi, Miss Ledford, this is Susie. I'm going to pass off line 13, whatever. They'd start playing. If they made a mistake, hit number 8 on the phone, they got to do it over. It was a wonderful system. So that rank system really did help me after I'd been teaching for a number of years to help children, put the onus on them. And if they get 9 points in a 9-week period, they got a B in band. 8 is a C. And very rarely did a kid not make an A in band, and they earned it. You just don't pass out the grades. If a kid got a poor grade, parents got on the kid, not me, because he didn't pass off. So I would say here's some things I wrote down because I didn't want to forget them. If you're teaching, and obviously you're a band director, you are teaching in a school setting, make friends with some key people in the school. Head custodian, secretary, bookkeeper. If you're a high school teacher, the football coach. Always made friends with the football coach, and we never had any real problems. So I would also say record every class, not just the concerts, but record the class and let the kids listen. They'll hear things that you didn't hear. Some things will get corrected that you don't have to talk about. And I had some fun with it too. The kids always knew I was recording, and I'd play it back. If there's an argument, we'd play it back again and analyze it. So one day, they had these old reel-to-reel tape recorders, and it's running. The kids thought it was taping, but it wasn't. It was on play. So we finished, and I said, okay, let's see what this sounds like. I hit the rewind button, and it was the Guggenheimer Sauerkraut Band. A bunch of professionals that, make them all mistakes beginners make. Cymbal crash in the wrong place. And I'm watching the kids' eyes. And the first chair players are rolling their eyes like, come on, Miss Ledford, give me a break. Last chairs are like, I knew we were bad. I didn't know we were that bad. Another thing I would say is every kid has to be involved in solo and ensemble. And even if you're out in Podunkville, there must be a retired teacher or a professional or somebody get private lessons. Those two things together will make or break your band. If each kid in the band has a characteristic sound, then the whole band's going to have a good sound. And if they don't, you're never going to get a good sound. I don't care how many notes you play or how difficult the music is. But private teachers can really, really help you. And I had some fantastic private teachers on each one of the instruments. And that just was amazing how that worked. I would say challenge the students with good music. Jack Williams said one time, he said, if I have a weak clarinet section, which is hilarious because I never knew he had one, he said, I'll play something like Man and Veen, which requires clarinets to, do better. And it's funny because he mentioned that, because I thought, I played that in high school. Man and Veen, Tulsa, Universal Judgment, and years later I realized we had done some really good music in high school. Play recordings of pros, both for kids on their instruments, ensembles, jazz bands, concert band. And when the teachers play along with the kids get that sound in their head. And I don't know exactly how that works, but I do know that it works. You also have to be organized. The two things that'll get you fired is messing around with the little kids sexually and not taking care of business as far as money is concerned. And so band directors, if you're organized in your personal affairs and your finances and whatnot, and you got the band money taken care of, then most everything else, as far as your job security is concerned, will take care of itself. But I just need to say that because that's how I feel. One of the things is be positive. In 1983, when I did the All-State Junior High Band in Jacksonville, I talked to Jack Crew, who we were friends, and he had done it the year before, and I said, Jack, do you have any suggestions? He said, just be positive, just be positive. And I'm like, okay. And we had a wonderful band, did some really hard high school level music, and they really pulled it off. It was a great experience for me. One of the things I also did, I duplicated the FBA judges sheets. And it didn't matter if we were going solo ensemble or concert festival, contest festival, MPA. Mm-hmm. They had an assignment. They had to find 4 bands or 4 or 5 solos and ensembles and actually write the sheets. And I didn't care about the rating because I knew the smart ones are going to go to the judges' ratings and copy them anyway. But it forces the kids to hone in on phrasing and those kinds of things, tone quality, rather than just a bunch of notes, and it really did help their education. So that was one of the things I did that really did help. Another thing is don't ever turn a kid away. Everett Junior High, Panama City, Herbert Bentz wanted to be in band. I had given the Selmer Music Aptitude test, and I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, you don't have any talent. I'm 20 years old. I'm an FSU graduate. I know everything about everything, right? He just kept on and on and on. Found out he's an A student, played a little piano. So I said, okay, I'll let you in band against my better judgment. Put you on the easiest instrument I know, baritone. He turned out to be first-year baritone in the junior high band and then Rutherford High when I went to high school. Won at state, played all the accompaniments on the piano, straight A student. His brother Alan was in the state senate, Alan Bentz. But I learned from that. Don't turn a kid away. Use the test as a motivator to get the kids interested. He had probably had a bad day. Who knows? You know. So I've learned a whole lot more than kids have over the years, I think. Okay.
Well, tell me about something about your personal character that's helped you achieve such a consistent high level of excellence.
Well, I mentioned about becoming a Christ follower. That changed my life around. That made sure that I had integrity, that I tried to treat people fairly. Didn't always happen, but you know, you get forgiveness too. I think about some of the things I did to kids you couldn't do today, get fired for, you know. But like making them come mow my grass as punishment for not doing something, it's ridiculous. But I think that more than anything, also, I knew I had a job to do. And I knew with my vision problem, I had to work twice as hard to be average. And so you just do it. The hard work, the being consistent, even to the point, and sometimes you can overdo it, to the point of ignoring my family. I cared more, I wouldn't say that, but I spent more time with other people's children than with my own. When I went to Valencia, I had time off, and the two girls were teenagers then, and I'd tell them to do something. They'd say, Mom, who is this guy? All of a sudden, I'm home more. And I prayed a lot.
Which is always good advice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're about at the end of our half-hour allotted time, but I'd still like to hear one little story about something that happened during your teaching career that you'd like to share with us.
Okay. Before we do that, in case we run out of time, I want to thank you, Tina LaFerrier, and FBA for the Legacy Project. I've learned a lot by looking at the other people, and I just want you to know, for one thing, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
My one story has to do with music for Prague. I'm at Oak Ridge, and I told the kids, I said, every year in the past, we sight read a bunch of music, and then we narrow it down to a couple of tunes, and I let you vote which one you want to do. And you always vote half of you for one, half for the other. I said, so I'm in a position, I have to make a decision. I'm down if I do, down if I don't. And I went on talking about Prague and Mr. Who's and all. Greg Rayleigh, my first chair trombone, my band captain, my preacher's kid is standing right here with some old yellow Octagon soap he'd gotten out of the bathroom. I said, Greg, what is this? He said, this is soap. They knew if they cussed, I made them bite on soap. That's what my mother did to me. You couldn't do that today, get away with it. I said, Greg, and all the kids knew him, of course. They knew his father. Reverend Rayleigh had been with us as a chaperone to Washington and all, and I'm like, oh man. I said, okay, Greg, let me explain something to you. This is just a figure of speech. This is not cursing. Damn if I do, damn if I don't. He said, oh, you said it again. Okay, so then I made a mistake. I said, all right, I'll be a good sport. So I take a bite on that soap. Then I ran out to the water fountain in the lobby. I mean, bubbles everywhere. I walked back in. Then I knew why kid didn't cuss after he bit on that soap. Oh my goodness. Kids were laughing so hard. A couple of seniors had actually fallen on the floor laughing. Well, what that did for the band, that melded the whole group together. From that point on, everything just kind of fell in place. And I'm not sure the kids were capable of playing that piece of music, but they blew the stuffings out of it. And at State at Winter Park, I know Jay Julian, my college band director, was there. And he wrote on the sheet, I'm sorry you left Tennessee. He didn't know he's the reason I left. And he said this is one of the finest high school bands in the nation. But that was a funny story that you never forget, you know, biting on that soap.
I'll bet you can taste it to this day.
Oh, can I?
Well, we're at the end of our interview time. It has been delightful. I want to thank you, and it's time to say bye-bye.
Well, thank you so much. God bless you. Bye-bye.